She found a diary with her name, written years before she was born. They were quiet observations, delicate musings, vivid descriptions of the everyday. The author wrote about the changing seasons, the habits of the robins nesting in the oak tree outside, the taste of freshly baked apple pie, the warmth of the sun on her skin. It was an intimate portrait of a gentle, introspective life. Eleanor, the diary's author, seemed to live in this very house. The descriptions of the garden, the layout of the rooms, even the peculiar creak of the third step on the main staircase, matched her own home with eerie precision. She read about a small, hidden nook in the living room, a place Eleanor herself had discovered as a child, a secret space only she seemed to know about. The diary described it with such familiarity, such affection, that it felt as though the previous Eleanor was sitting beside her, sharing a confidence. She learned about the original Eleanor's quiet routines. Her love for afternoon tea in the parlor, her meticulous care of the rose garden, her fondness for reading by the flickering lamplight in the evenings. These were not grand adventures, but they painted a picture of a life lived with a gentle rhythm, a deep appreciation for beauty and stillness. As Eleanor delved deeper, she noticed recurring themes. A subtle melancholy that occasionally colored the otherwise peaceful entries. A longing for something unnamed, a sense of quiet anticipation, and a persistent fascination with dreams. The other Eleanor meticulously recorded her dreams, sometimes sketching them, other times describing their fantastical landscapes in vivid detail. They were often filled with strange symbols, swirling mists, and figures that seemed to shift and shimmer at the edges of her memory. One particular dream entry chilled Eleanor to the bone. Dated November 5, 1932, it described a dream of a young woman with long, dark hair, wearing a sapphire pendant, standing in the very attic where Eleanor now sat. The dream Eleanor described the woman's eyes as piercingly familiar, and spoke of a feeling of profound recognition. Eleanor herself had long, dark hair, and her own grandmother, Margaret, had given her a sapphire pendant for her 21st birthday, a family heirloom that she wore almost every day. The connection felt too specific, too uncanny to be mere coincidence. The entries continued, weaving a delicate tapestry of a life lived long ago, yet strangely mirroring her own. The other Eleanor described a particular fondness for drawing, a hobby Eleanor herself pursued in her free time. The author wrote about her struggles with a sense of unbelonging, a feeling Eleanor herself often experienced, a quiet yearning for something more, something undefined. The most unnerving aspect, however, was the way the diary entries sometimes seemed to directly address her. Not explicitly, of course, but in the way the words felt directed, a whisper across the decades. An entry from December 15, 1935, spoke of a winter storm, describing the way the wind howled around the eaves, and then, almost as an afterthought, added, "I wonder if the house will feel as lonely then, or if it will be filled with a different kind of quiet." Eleanor remembered a similar storm just last winter, sitting by the window, feeling that very same quiet, a comforting rather than a lonely one. The diary became Eleanor's obsession. She spent hours in the attic, the sunlight fading through the dusty window panes as she devoured the pages. She neglected her usual routines, her friends, even her work. The past had consumed her, and the voice of the other Eleanor had become a constant companion, a ghostly echo in her mind. She discovered a hidden compartment in the back of the chest, a small, cleverly disguised drawer. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded silk, was a single, silver key, intricately wrought. It was small, delicate, and unlike any key she had ever seen. There was no obvious lock for it in the chest, or anywhere in the attic. The key felt significant, a puzzle piece yet to be placed. As she continued reading, the entries grew increasingly abstract, more focused on the other Eleanor's dreams and a growing sense of foreboding. The language became more poetic, almost cryptic. The dreams were no longer just vivid images, they were portals, glimpses into strange, parallel realities. The last few entries were particularly unsettling. The handwriting became less steady, more hurried. The final entry, dated January 20, 1942, was barely legible. It spoke of a door opening, a crossing over, and then, a single, chilling phrase, "She knows my name." And then, silence. The diary abruptly ended. The other Eleanor, the one who bore her name, who had lived in her house, simply ceased to write. It was the same year her grandmother had said the eccentric Aunt Beatrice had vanished. Could the diary's Eleanor be Aunt Beatrice? But Beatrice was her grandmother's aunt, meaning she would have been born decades before 1900. The dates didn't align. The family tree was a jumbled mess in Eleanor's head. Disturbed, Eleanor decided to speak to her grandmother. Margaret, ever the storyteller, had always been a fount of family history, though sometimes embellished. She carefully brought the diary downstairs, wrapped in a linen cloth. She laid it on the old parlor table, the same table the diary's Eleanor might have taken her tea on. Margaret's eyes, usually so bright, widened as she saw the green leather book. A strange flicker, almost fear, passed through them. "Where did you find this, child?" her grandmother asked, her voice softer than usual. Eleanor explained, the words tumbling out in a rush, about the chest, the attic, the name. She watched her grandmother's face, searching for answers, for recognition. Margaret slowly reached out, her trembling fingers tracing the embossed pattern on the cover. This belonged to my great-aunt, yes. Beatrice. Her voice was a whisper now. But it was said to be lost, burned in a fire years ago. The dates don't match, Grandma, Eleanor explained. This starts in 1927. Aunt Beatrice would have been much older then. Margaret sighed, a deep, weary sound. She looked at Eleanor, a strange mixture of sorrow and ancient knowledge in her gaze. There are things, Eleanor, that we don't speak of. Things that run in families, like a forgotten river underground. Aunt Beatrice, she was a visionary, they said. She saw things, dreamed things, and she was obsessed with time, with the way it flows, not just forward, but in other directions too. Margaret explained that Aunt Beatrice had a sister, Eleanor, who had died very young, before Margaret was born. This sister, the original Eleanor, was said to have had a gift, a sensitivity to the unseen, a profound connection to the house itself. She was sickly, frail, and spent much of her short life indoors, observing the world from her windows. It was this Eleanor who had filled the house with paintings and sketches, and who was known to write obsessively in a leather-bound book. The family had assumed the book was lost, a casualty of time. They said she could sense the future, Margaret continued, her voice barely audible. Not clearly, not like a fortune teller. More like echoes, feelings. And she often spoke of another Eleanor, born long after her, who would discover her words. The revelation stunned Eleanor. She was not just reading a diary. She was being contacted, reaching across the decades, by a distant relative who shared her name, and perhaps, a connection she couldn't yet fully grasp. The other Eleanor wasn't just a historical figure, she was a ghostly mentor, a silent guide. The silver key now held a new significance. Eleanor remembered a locked cabinet in the study downstairs, a beautiful, antique piece that had always been bolted shut, its key long lost. Her grandmother had always told her it held old family papers. Eleanor raced downstairs, the diary clutched in one hand, the silver key in the other. The cabinet was large, dark wood, intricately carved. She inserted the key. It slid in perfectly, a soft click echoing in the quiet room. The doors swung open with a gentle creak. Inside, among stacks of yellowed letters and brittle documents, was another small, leather-bound book. This one was much older, its cover almost black with age. It too was a diary. And on its first page, in a more formal, but still elegant hand, was the inscription, Beatrice Finch, her thoughts and observations. 1905. This was Aunt Beatrice's diary. Eleanor had found a connection, a bridge between the two Eleanors. She quickly flipped through Beatrice's entries. They were different from the first Eleanor's, more philosophical, less focused on the mundane. Beatrice wrote about her fascination with time, her theories about alternate realities, and her attempts to connect with the past and future through meditation and dreams. She spoke of her young sister, Eleanor, and her extraordinary sensitivity, her unsettling visions. A particular entry from Beatrice's diary, dated 1941, caught Eleanor's eye. It spoke of a dream she had, a vivid dream of a young woman who looked remarkably like her deceased sister, Eleanor, but with a sapphire pendant, standing in the attic, holding a green leather diary. Beatrice wrote about a feeling of immense joy and connection, a sense of having finally found her. The entry concluded with a cryptic statement, "The door is opening. She knows my name, and soon, I will know hers." Eleanor felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. Beatrice had dreamed of her, of Eleanor, discovering the first diary. It was a cyclical loop, a confirmation that time, for these women, wasn't linear. The other Eleanor had written about her, Beatrice had dreamed of her, and now, Eleanor had found them both. She spent the next few weeks devouring both diaries, meticulously piecing together the narrative of these two extraordinary women and their connection to the house. The house itself felt different now, no longer just a collection of rooms, but a living entity, imbued with their energies, their dreams, their unspoken knowledge. The whispers in the attic were no longer just dust motes dancing, they were the echoes of two souls, reaching out across time. Eleanor began to notice small changes in her own life. A heightened sense of intuition. Dreams that felt strangely significant, filled with symbolic imagery she couldn't quite decipher, but that resonated deeply within her. A feeling that she was not alone in the house, but surrounded by a benevolent presence, a quiet guardianship. She would sometimes find herself instinctively knowing where a forgotten item was, or sensing a change in the weather before it occurred. She never spoke of the diaries to anyone outside of her grandmother, fearing they would dismiss it as grief or delusion. But the diaries became her secret world, a profound source of understanding and connection. She began to draw again, inspired by the intricate dreamscapes described by the first Eleanor. She started to meditate, attempting to tap into the wellspring of intuition that seemed to flow through her family line. The green diary, the one with her name, always stayed close to her. She would read from it often, her fingers tracing the familiar script. The final, chilling phrase, "She knows my name," now held a new meaning. It wasn't a threat, it was a recognition, a welcoming. The other Eleanor had known she would come, that she would find the diary, that she would connect with her. The house, once a silent shell, was now a living testament to a lineage of sensitive souls, bound by a shared name and a unique perception of time. Eleanor was no longer just Eleanor Vance, she was Eleanor, the inheritor of a remarkable legacy, a recipient of whispers from a past that felt as real as her own breath. The line between present and past, between the living and the ethereal, had blurred, and in that blurring, Eleanor found a profound and unexpected sense of belonging.